Hello there everyone, and welcome back to Flamebait Talks. I, of course, am your host, Flamebait, but as you know by now, you can all just call me Flames. So today we are actually going to be talking about how I got into the furry fandom, and a little bit about my Fursona slash Fursonas, and some of my other characters. This was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. I actually wasn't 100% sure what I was going to be talking to you about today. I went to YouTube for some inspiration, and the thing that it seemed like kept getting suggested to me to watch was how I became a furry, or what let me into the furry fandom videos. So I kind of took that as a sign, and here we are. So we will just dive right in. I don't know if there was particularly any one event that led me into becoming a furry. I can definitely think of a few things that probably contributed to that and definitely held my interest, especially as a young child. One of the things, of course, is Disney movies, which I would think a lot of the people in our fandom also can say they have similar experiences with. There's just something so cute about anthropomorphic animals singing and dancing and doing all the things that, you know, seem courageous and heroic, and there's something about that that's really appealing. I would say my very first, I won't say love, because it was definitely not one of my favorite videos, but I liked the idea, would have been the old school Robin Hood movies, with Robin Hood being a fox, and Little John is basically Baloo from the Jungle Book, and, you know, a lot of those characters, they held a special place in my heart, but it wasn't something that I was over the top about as a kid. It wasn't until a little bit later, and I started watching more like older kids' television shows, that I actually came to a realization. It wasn't necessarily for the furry fandom. This one was actually more towards mythical creatures, and it's actually... Oh, as if I don't knock over my mic. Gargoyles! If I can get this in front of the camera right. Yeah. For any of you that do not know what Gargoyles was, it was a much too short-lived cartoon in the early 90s that I feel deserves a much-needed reboot, and I would definitely love a live-action movie of that. That'd be pretty awesome. The character in all of this that held my fascination the most was a red gargoyle named Brookyln, which I will put, I guess, here? Sure. Yeah, right there. There was something about the way the character was drawn that really appealed to me, and I think this also might have been when I started thinking about, you know, how I identified as far as, like, being gay. Of course, as a small child at the time, I didn't really know what homosexuality was or anything, so it was just something like, oh, I really like this character. This character looks really cool. I want to be like this character. But at the same time, I was also thinking, are there other characters that look like this one? I should go find out. And it kind of became more of a, not quest, but I started looking for this character archetype more and more. And it was something that eventually did crop back up, and this was something that this particular show, I think, is what kind of pushed me over the edge into the shallow end of the furry fandom pool. It actually was not Pokemon. I did love Pokemon, but there was something about Pokemon that just didn't quite get it for me. So I was a huge, huge fan of Digimon. You can't really see because my paws are too big. Yeah, I still have Digivices because I'm a nerd. This was something that I thought was super awesome. They had all of these anthropomorphic characters. There was a lot of bugs and plants, which even to this day I also think is interesting. I think, you know, aside from a very famous cockroach, there aren't enough bugs in our fandom. And seeing some kind of anthropomorphic plants, that could be kind of cool. I could definitely see us inviting some of those into our fandom and, you know, being pretty excited about seeing them. There was one character in all of this, particularly, that definitely had interest. It was WereGarurumon, which again I'll put somewhere here, I guess. I liked the character line to begin with because when it started out, Gabumon, which was the rookie form, was this very, you know, timid kind of creature that was all about, you know, taking his time and getting things figured out in his head right before he acted. Then he evolves into this big striped tiger wolf looking thing that that shot ice out of his maw, and that was pretty darn cool. And the next level was this hybrid wolf human type thing that was kind of edgy, and that's kind of when I had my oh moment, as we'll call it. And I was like, oh, that's yes, I could use more of that in my life. But that's not really something that I knew what to look for. I did like a lot of Digimon fan fiction, and I, you know, wrote my own. I drew like my own Digimon characters, and how I got started into the fandom. But I didn't really know that, you know, I was a furry, and I didn't quite associate it with the furry fandom. It was more along the lines of I am a huge fan of Digimon. Continuing along those lines, I had a friend that introduced me to Nekomatas, which are kind of these cat people type things, if you don't really know what those are. I was not a big fan of cats, but I thought to myself, well, why couldn't you do the same thing with other animals, like canids or reptiles or something along those lines? So I did a little research into that, and that's when I found the furry fandom. Just the art side. I didn't really know what else there was to the fandom at the time. But I knew that I really liked anthropomorphic characters, and I liked drawing them. I liked having stories involving them, and that's how I portrayed things. It was not actually until, let's see, I take that back. Around the same time, I had the horrible misfortune of seeing a particular episode of, I'm not sure if it was NCIS or CSI, what it was. Everyone in our fandom knows the name of the episode, Fur and Loathing. It was my unfortunate rather waste of time to see this as a kid, and it skewed my vision of what the furry fandom could be. for a very long time. And so I was like, okay, I'm definitely not going to be doing that. I'll just draw anthropomorphic characters, and that's going to be the end of that. I did not really revisit that again until I was in my late teens, early 20s, somewhere around there. It was actually when my husband and I started dating. Because he had said he had an interest in anthropomorphic characters, and I was like, oh, in that case, I have a bunch of art that I need to show you. And I pulled out my old notebooks, and going all the way back to horrible drawings, all the way up until what I had at that time. And, he kind of asked the question. He was like, oh, so are you a furry? And I was like, no, I'm definitely not one of those. That's weird. And he was like, well, it's not that weird. I was like, yeah, but that one show, and he kind of stopped me right there. He was like, okay, first off, I would like to tell you that I am a furry. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And he was very nice about the whole thing, even though that I basically just insulted him and what he liked. He did a very good job of explaining things to me that that was a very bad television episode that took a very skewed and very, very dim and small look into what the fandom actually was and what it could be. My husband then showed me all the wonderful things that he had experienced and been in the fandom, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. And I was like, well, this is fine. I definitely shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. I should have done my own research. I'm sorry. And he was perfectly fine with that. We continued on this path for probably 2 or 3 years. All of my friends and all of his friends started making the joke, well, your husband's a furry, like you have to be a furry by default, right? And I was like, I don't know. I definitely don't have as dim of a view of it as I used to, so maybe. So one day we were sitting at the table, and I had my notepad out, and I was gonna draw something, and I was like, you know what? I don't really know what to draw. And I looked at my husband, and I was like, what's your fursona? And he looked at me. And, we had talked briefly about it before, but it wasn't something that, I had ever really asked in depth about, so he started telling me about his fursona at the time, which used to be a white and blue fox called Walter. He, described the character to me, and I started to draw it, and, I kind of left room to one side, and I was like, alright, what do you think I would be? And he looks at me and he says, are you asking me to help you with a fursona? And I was like, well, I don't know, maybe. So he did a little more poking just for fun, and then he kind of was like, okay, well, I picked, Walter, which was an Arctic fox, because that's one of the things that always made me feel good. You know, I had this little Arctic Fox plush when I was a little kid, and that's one of the earliest memories that I have, and it was always something that I really loved. So he kind of was incorporated into my persona, and I thought about that, and I was like, well, I've always liked dogs. And he was like, okay, well, if you could be a dog, what kind of dog would you be? And at the time I was like, a beagle, because beagles are awesome and they're so loyal and loving. Immediately after that, I cried a little bit because we used to have beagles, and there was one in particular that I had for a good chunk of my childhood, and one day he disappeared and we never found him. And so, you know, that it kind of struck me after all this time, and I didn't really see it coming, and I was like, okay, I can't be a beagle, I gotta be something else. That's gonna be too hard. So I thought about it a little bit more, and I was like, well, my mom's family is German, and there's a wolf on the family crest. It's a black wolf. So I think I'll just do that. So he's like, okay, well, what do you want to have it have any special characteristics that would kind of let it stand out from others? And at the time, you know, I changed my hair color a lot, and at the time I was like, well, yeah, I want him to have blue hair like me. So he had blue hair, and he was primarily black, and the only distinctive feature that I really came up with was that his eyes changed color. And like, he had blue when he was feeling like happy or calm, orange when he was excited or frightened, and red when he was very angry. And then my husband was sitting there, and he's like, okay, now you should come up with a name for your persona. And at the time I was kind of like, well, why can't I just use my name? Like, I don't know if someone calling me a different name, I'd kind of be sitting here just like da 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 da, realize they're talking to me like 4 minutes later and be like, oh wait, what? So I think that it was a little hard for me to come up with a name at first. Eventually I decided on Arc. And the reason why I kind of thought of that name was because, you know, I thought about my past and everything, and, you know, I was the vessel that was carrying all of my emotions and stuff through a violent storm, hoping that one day I could find a safe place. And my husband was like, geez, that's really deep. And I'm like, stop. But I continued to kind of do things like that. The name of Arc did not stay. He also kind of changed a little bit in his fur pattern. I lost the blue hair because I eventually had to dye my hair back to its original color due to job restrictions, unfortunately, which is stupid, and I will do another video all about that, just not right now. The main thing that changed about him, I added a lot of gray. His hair was gray. I added a gray tip to his tail, and he also had a left foot, which is gray, and like a little kind of stomach patch that was also gray. So really nothing that was incredibly drastic. But I also changed the name to Shameful. And again, that was one of those things where I was being me, and I was like, oh, I must be deep and dark and brooding. I took shameful because, you know, I had spent a lot of my childhood being ashamed of, you know, who I was, and then when it kind of transitioned into my teenage years, like, I was still kind of ashamed, but I was struggling to kind of fight who I was, and like, I kind of worked it into the backstory that, you know, a lot of people said that he was a shameful wolf, and he took the name as a defiance of what they were saying about him. So he might have been the shameful wolf, but he would never be ashamed of himself anymore. I actually have... if I continue to drop things today. This is Shameful. He is my, I guess, secondary Fursona at this point in time. He's been there for a lot of my adventure into the fandom, so he will always be a very big part of me, and I think that I will always count him as one of my Fursonas. So I don't think that anything will ever change there. If anyone was wondering, this badge was actually made by the wonderful Stabler Cake. You can go check them out on Twitter, Instagram, or one of their other sites. They do some amazing work. But yeah, so I made these changes. I made this Fursona, and for a long time it was just, you know, it was a character that I put into stories and into art, so there could be, you know, a actual representation of myself with Walter, which was my husband's Fursona. And, you know, the more and more that happened, it started to look really cute and really sweet. So I was like, okay, well, this is nice. And I also started to draw more, you know, characters and more stuff with my Fursona and his Fursona. Then came the day that we were invited by one of our mutual friends to a fur meet, and I was like, well, what do we do? Like, what what is a fur meet? Like, what, do I have to have a fursuit? Because I don't have a fursuit. I can't go if I don't have a fursuit, right? And my husband says, no, that's not how that works. Calm down. So I went. It was a bowling meetup. There was pizza, and I think there was also a movie afterwards, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure. We honestly really only stayed for the bowling, but I did actually get to meet other furs, and I was happy about that. I also got to see some of my first, like, real live fursuits, and that was also really cool. I unfortunately did not interact as much as I should have or wanted to, and that goes back to my previous video, which I won't get into here. But it was just a lot of that social anxiety, like, I don't know any of you people, so I'm just going to sit here and observe and make sure that everything turns out okay, and we'll maybe try this another time. So we got through the fur meet, and husband was like, hey, what'd you think of it? I was like, I liked it. And he was like, well, you didn't really seem to interact much. And I was like, I know, and that's just me. You know that by now. I did like it. I want to go to another one. So there was another one the following month, and I definitely was a little more interactive. We actually got to meet a nice cat and husky couple that I really, really loved, and I do miss talking to. I really want to try to meet up with them again sometime soon. I got to talk to husband about that because they were really awesome. And I had a lot more fun the next time because I interacted. And with each new interaction, I was like, okay, maybe I'm, more furry than I thought. And I would say probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I finally was just like, you know what? Yeah, I'm a furry. There's no more default furry for me. I am just full-blown furry. And that's pretty much how I got into the furry fandom. It was a very long, convoluted thing, and I'm sure it was also a very long, convoluted explanation there. I would like to continue to talk about this, that way you all know how I got to Flame here. Aside from Arc, which became Shameful, I had a ton of other characters in between there that were not Fursonas. They were just characters that I wanted to draw and put out into the world. So I actually have a couple of those that I will show you right here. Let me just grab them. The first one that I wanted to show you apparently has run away, and I'm not going to chase it all over the office. So I will move to the second one that I was going to show everyone. This is Jeffrey the Sheep, and he was the proprietor of the Wooltop Cafe, which was a coffee shop and a story that I was working on, that I really need to get back to one day, just not right now. This was actually one of the ones that I am the most proud of. I'm not sure why. I just like the color. I like how the character turned out. This is an African otter. I don't actually remember his name at the moment, but in the story he is a professional soccer player, and he is very new to the city in question where all of these characters lived, and he was going through his own kind of things. The very next character almost was a Fursona, because, I feel like everyone kind of has those ones where you're like, oh, that's really cool. I might want one of these in my life. So I did a shark. This is Hector. He is from Ecuador or Colombia. I don't actually remember. The flag is the background here. So if anyone can comment below so I can remember and not feel like an idiot, that would be fantastic. This also continued on into one of my final characters. This is another one that I was pretty proud of, and he very nearly became a Fursona. I was actually designing him before the opportunity for me to buy Flame came up. Literally just as I was finishing his design, Flame was put up for sale, and I was like, oh, this boy, this is me. Like, I have to get him. But this was Punch, and he is your friendly little comedy bloodhound. I did take a lot of inspiration from Huckleberry Hound, because that is a cool retro character that I think does not get as much love as he definitely should. So yeah, those are all of the OCs that kind of led up to Flame. There was one Fursona in between Shameful and Flamebait, only because there was a time in my life when I very heavily considered getting rid of Shameful. That was mainly because I was going through a transition in my life, and I wasn't sure if I was hanging on to Shameful for the right reasons. So I did eventually decide that I was going to keep Shameful, but I also had this other Fursona made. His name is, if I can get his badge, this is Jitter, and he looks like a saber cat, but he technically is not. Jitter is a science experiment, and that was his backstory. He was an amalgamation of several different animals, and this is just kind of how he turned out. And then, of course, as you all know, oh, sorry, real quick, I will also say Jitter was also made by the wonderful Stabler Cake. Again, they do amazing work, especially if you like toothy boys. They're definitely the person to check out. But yeah, I had Jitter for about a year. Then I started working on Punch. Literally, as soon as I finished Punch, the opportunity to buy Flame here came up. And literally, as soon as I saw him, I was like, wow, this is me. This has to be the thing that I've been waiting for. And I had never actually connected with a character so quickly on such an immense emotional level. And he was actually at an auction, and I was wrecked for pretty much the whole time that the auction was up, because I was like, oh my gosh, what if I don't get him? I will be crushed if I don't get him. But fortunately I did, and he's here. And again, this guy was made by the wonderful Keto Pagano over in Brazil. Definitely check them out. They do some amazing pre-made work. They've also done some commissions in the past. Just keep an eye on them, because one day they're going to be making phenomenal suits. Not that this isn't already phenomenal in my mind, but they're definitely at the top of my list if I ever decide to, you know, make Flame here a full suit, or if I decide to go for a Flame 2.0, I would definitely hit them up. So if you like fursuits and the process and the art behind it, I definitely advise you checking them out because they're amazing. I do use the Flame badge and the outro video, or the outro segment of the video, I should say. That was actually drawn by me. I do a lot of like retro toony characters, if you all couldn't figure that out by now. But yeah, so this has pretty much been it. This is the road that I have taken to becoming a furry and becoming the furry that I am sitting before you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, it was kind of just a spur-of-the-moment video. Really didn't have any plans to do a how I got into the furry fandom thing today, but something that I might have to do again in the future, depending on things how things go here, and depending on if I learn English. Sorry, it's been a very strange day for me. But yeah, as always, I want to thank you for joining us here on Flamebait Talks. I hope that you all will keep it sizzling, and I will see you next Saturday in my new video. Bye! And real quick, I actually almost forgot, so sorry about this little extended bit of the video here after my normal outro. I actually wanted to give a huge thank you to my current subscribers. I am a very new channel, and at the time of this video being made, there are only 5 of you, but I want you to know that I deeply, deeply, deeply appreciate all 5 of you. You're my first step, and you 5 will always hold a very, very special place in my heart. You did not have to subscribe, so thank you for that. I would also like to give a special shout out to a very awesome Yin who also follows me on Instagram. That would be the Laughing Hyena, and thank you for being my very first comment on one of the videos. So yeah, I thank all of you. I hope that you know that I am your number one fans. I really am about all of that. I can't even get it out really, because I didn't even think that I would have 5 people at all. So thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope that we will continue to see more of you over here at Flamebait Talks. So one final time, bye, enjoy your day, and you keep it sizzling.